Anyway, thanks for showing up, everybody. Always good to have a good turnout for an EA directors meeting. Okay. So the TNRD acknowledges that we are connected with many First Nations communities across our vast regional district. And today we're located in the Tecumseh-Secwepemc territory, situated within unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with I'll struggle with that word, Secwepemc, and respect their territory and the land on which we are gathered. Okay, I've just got one addition for the agenda. I've asked Scott to make the present update on our remuneration and expense bylaw.
Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Thank you. So I believe what you're looking for is to move that the agenda be amended by adding a new item from Mr. Hildebrand as item 5.1, an update on the remuneration proposals going to the board later today.
Okay, great. I'll do that.
That's correct.
That's all right.
We just need approval, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So that was additions and deletions for the agenda. And now we will move the recommendation for the minutes of November 7th, 2023. Okay, all in favor? Motion's carried. Okay, now we go into Scott's little update. That would be great. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Laird. Chair Laird just asked me this a few minutes ago, so I'm going to go off the top of my head, and I do have a few things in front of me here, but I think what you're asking for is just a quick overview of what's being presented this afternoon at the board for the three reports. Okay, so I'll start with then the board report that would be on board remuneration for 2023. That'll be in today's agenda package, of course, for the board this afternoon, and that it's that the board approves that 4% applied to January 1st retroactively. That's kind of what the consensus was. That's what we brought forward. So the board then will decide if that's the right number going forward to make a final decision this afternoon. So I'm not sure, is there any questions on that? That one's pretty straightforward. Okay. Number two is kind of remuneration going forward. And there's two parts to that. One is that the EAA committee, along with the whole board of the committee of the whole, decided that we would go back and take another look at this. And so it was decided that communications would be rolled into as an allowance versus an expense. And it'll be taxed, of course, and it's also increased by $1,000 for $2,500 per year per electoral area and $250 per municipal director. So that's on the agenda right now. And that's what will be presented this afternoon to the entire board for decision. Any questions on, I guess, on that specific part? And then also part of that is the remuneration about taking the base pay of the electoral areas up to an average number. And that one has got a recommendation as well. It works out to about a 15% increase. It goes up to around the $30,000 mark. And that's on the board agenda as well this afternoon for approval. And any questions, I guess, on that part?
Go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, sorry, maybe not directly related to this topic, but in general for remuneration, does municipal member directors have any like what we gone through for EAs? Do they have similar reviews and discussions and for their remuneration?
Yeah, through Chair Laird, we only do one review, and that's for the entire board. So what the EA committee chose to do and made recommendations was only recommendations to the board. The only body that approves or makes changes would be the board. So although the EA committee made suggestions that'll come up to the board and are part of the presentation, the full board today will make the decision on kind of what those changes will be, if that makes sense.
So there's basically a thought of equivalence of municipal members sitting together like this to their
yeah, they're going to have to do that on the fly today and make potentially recommendations or changes. Yeah, but we also had that discussion, if you remember back at the committee of the whole, where everybody had a full wholesome discussion of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And then third and finally is board expenses. And really the only change that's being brought forward, there was some minor tweaks and changes that we all went through. But the big change would be to the electoral area director is moving from 2,000 to 3,000 annually for discretionary travel. And that would be done through the expense report as you normally would do. But really that's the major change that'll be presented today, this afternoon to the board.
We did find a typo estimate. I think that's getting sorted out today. It's on the one report that we wouldn't be getting paid for Silga and LGLA.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It
Yeah,
was
that
just had an end.
Amanda
that
will
was it.
clarify that for
Amanda-
sure.
Yeah, she was gonna look after that.
She'll do that, make sure we have the right information.
Thank you. Any other discussion from the board?
No, awesome. And just for the board or for the committee's awareness, I need to step away at 10 o'clock to jump on that task force from 10 to 12. So Jamie will kind of fill in on that one. But I'll be back here this afternoon for the board meeting. So thank you.
Next is reports. Gonna get something about tiny houses. It sounds like, Alex. Are you looking after tiny houses? I don't,
That's-
yeah,
that's-
maybe that's the wrong
That's the wrong question. Yeah.
Yes, Scott.
Chair, the next topic is economic development, 5.1.
Oh, okay. I
Got the old one. Thank you. You're correct.
reports. Yeah, yeah, no, that's where we're at right there. That wasn't on there. It just came on the other day. Are you, go ahead.
Yes, thank you,
Alex,
Chair.
thanks.
Yeah, so we didn't prepare a formal report, but we were asked to say a few words about tiny homes and maybe have a discussion and help answer some questions. So the question about tiny homes comes up frequently. Typically, the tiny homes we see on television don't meet BC Building Code, and they don't meet a Z240 or CSA, Canadian Standards Association certification. And so for that reason, local governments can't issue a building permit for that type of home or type of unit. So typically they're designed as RVs. And so in our regional district and in most municipalities, tiny homes are a form of RV that can end up in an RV park or similar, but they're not permitted on residential property as a dwelling because again, they don't meet code. We can't issue permits for them. I think what has come up is the context of something that's happening in Kelowna, where they're working with BC Housing to create a tiny home village. And in that scenario, what they're doing is they're basically creating in an industrial area, they're bringing in these pre-manufactured units. And I'm not sure what code standard that they meet, but they're bringing in these homes to get homeless people out of parks and into these safer forms of housing. So I think the idea was floated around that there might be an opportunity for the regional district to look at doing some kind of a village or provide housing and open to hearing discussion. But I think from staff's end, the key is that we have to ensure whatever we're putting out there meets code and is safe. And so like a Z240 manufactured home is an absolutely safe standard. We have companies in BC that are designing tiny homes to that standard, and we've issued permits for those already. They're just not quite as tiny as the ones we see on TV with the fold down ladders and the really micro homes. So when people ask, are tiny homes allowed in the TNRD? Again, small homes are permitted, manufactured homes are permitted, as long as it meets either code or Canadian CSA standard, we allow it, but we don't allow RVs because they weren't meant to be lived in. So maybe I'll leave it at that and just see if there's discussion about the idea.
Thanks, Alex. I did a little bit of looking to see what's available as far as building code standard that are available, and they are from a manufactured approved company. You can have them designed the way you want them, or they have all kinds of different floor plans that you can pick, and they're anywhere between, I think, 500 square feet up to 900 square feet, depending on what lifestyle you want. And some of the issues that I can see if we look at doing it with the TNRD is one is the zoning. If we look at the proposed new legislation coming from the provincial government on tiny homes that are Actually, I think municipalities have to incorporate that. It's a little bit more difficult for a regional district to do that because we don't have any services. There's very few areas that have a sewer system and a water system where you can increase density. And I don't think our bylaw right now, zoning bylaw, includes that sort of density is what the provincial government is suggesting. They're suggesting anywhere between, I think, 4 and 6 tiny houses going on to a residential lot. But that all has to be looked at. And if we're going to do that or have the opportunity for a person or a developer to come in, we need to have proper zoning looked at and make sure that if we do have an opportunity for a developer that wants to do that and do the expense of putting in sewer and water system, which they have to have proper zoning for that. And I'd maybe through to Alex, have you looked to see where the zoning would be or how it would be done?
Yes, through the chair. I just want to clarify a couple of things because there was that provincial announcement, but the provincial announcement was regarding first and foremost, secondary suites. So secondary suites are going to be required to be permitted in all residential zones under the new legislation, and that includes regional districts. The second piece is these 4 to 6 unit multifamily buildings essentially that are proposed, but that's only on municipalities that have a population over 5,000. So that won't impact regional districts. That legislation is not required for us. And part of the reason for that is because we don't have areas that are fully serviced with water and sewer. So it's hard to get that kind of density in many parts of the rural areas. And rural areas are meant to be rural in many cases. So they're not, the province isn't trying to force density into rural areas. And then there's some other changes. I'm hoping to have a more fulsome report for the entire board that explains some of those provincial changes. So that legislation isn't about tiny homes. That's about allowing multiple units code standard within a dwelling unit. In terms of the size of and how we could do this, again, it depends on what the board is trying to achieve with this. Do we have zoning? No, we don't have zoning for tiny homes. We have zoning for manufactured home parks, and that has a density that would allow multiple units. So even if we went away from the term tiny home and the board said we'd like to develop manufactured home parks, we have zoning for that. It's not pre-zoned. So we would, again, if we're going down this route, in theory, the TNRD would have to find land to rezone. We would rezone the land, and then at that point, we would need to get servicing as well. So you need some kind of a water system, some kind of a sewer system. And then there's questions about ownership, tenure, who operates it, who pays for it. That's typically why local governments don't get involved as the developer. They allow it to happen through a private developer, or they team up with BC Housing and do some kind of specialized project. But that's usually very specialized. Like I said, in the Kelowna case, it's to assist with homelessness. And in other places, they do build, BC Housing does build affordable housing, but those are typically multifamily, like townhouses or apartment units. It's not RVs or tiny homes, or I haven't seen them do a manufactured home park either. But so again, zoning, the board can rezone any piece of land. And so it would be, if you wanted to do this, you would find the land that is suitable for it. But I think the bigger question is servicing and who pays for it.
So the zoning would be just like a spot zone wherever, and it wouldn't be part of our overall zoning.
Correct. And I don't think you would pre-zone acres of land. You would find a suitable site and rezone that one. And then theoretically, you can replicate that in other areas.
Or possibly you work with a developer on the piece of land that they selected.
Correct.
Yeah. Thanks. So does anybody have any questions? Yes, go ahead, Director Thorpe.
Thank you. When you were talking about meeting code, and using the term tiny home, is there a minimum square footage that you would need for code?
So under code, there isn't a minimum square footage, but there's a minimum, say, hallway width. There's minimum door width. There's provisions where you can't get to a second level using fold down stairs, for example. So it's all these other provisions of code, the landing area, the stair requirements. When you factor all of that in, you can't physically make it that small to meet code, if that makes sense. So the code doesn't say minimum house size is this, but when you factor in all the minimum sizes of all the pieces of the home, we're finding you can't get it that small to meet code.
Any idea what the square footage would be to meet code?
No.
I know, tough question,
Yeah,
sorry.
off the top of my head, no. But again, we've seen some tiny homes built to the Z240 manufactured home standard, which comes out of the Canadian National Building Code. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure right around probably closer to 900 square foot. I think smaller than that could be difficult.
Okay, can I ask one more question? Okay, last question.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were looking at a smaller footprint, I think but we're needing all the amenities. Taxation wise, is this going to be a liability simply because they wouldn't be worth, that size of a home wouldn't necessarily be worth as much as a bigger home, yet we're still using all the proposed infrastructure, whether it be sewer, whether it be water, whether it be community halls, parks, all of that.
Mhm.
How do you think that would factor?
Mhm. Yeah, through the chair, that's a good question. Obviously, the smaller the home, there'd be less valuation on it for BC assessment, so there'd be less taxes on it. But I think that, again, you'd have to look at the economics of what the minimum density would be to make sense, right? So we wouldn't no developer would do a 5-unit, whether it be a manufactured home park or a tiny home village. There'd probably be a minimum density to even to make it economically feasible. I don't know that number off the top of my head, but even the manufactured home parks, I'll just turn to that because that's already allowed in zoning. That's already an affordable form of housing. We're not seeing very many new ones getting developed. And the reason is from private developers is because of the tremendous cost and the densities that are required. I don't know the minimum number, but you're going to need quite a few to be able to make it viable.
Thank you, Seth. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So just sharing from EA director's perspective in terms of challenges with residents. As soon as that news with Kelowna came out, I was asked by residents usually it comes out with if they're doing it, why can't we? So I just like to gather up some key points. If you can have any advice on what I can say, the points about code, that's very valid. But again, it goes back to, well, if it's code, so how is Kelowna doing it? Are they exempting that zone from the code requirements? Yeah, any advice on that would be appreciated. Thanks.
Yeah. So on the Kelowna one, I mean, I didn't reach out to BC Housing. I'm not sure what standard they're building these structures to. It's a very unique case. So how are they doing it? I mean, for one, they're spot zoning or even doing a temporary use permit in an industrial area. So this isn't in a residential neighborhood, which there's some controversy to that as well. And that one is very specific to getting people off of the streets, out of tents and into something more safe than that. But I think the big challenge, and that's why local governments, you're not seeing these all over. The places where we are seeing them, aside from this new Kelowna one, are areas that don't have zoning, don't have building bylaws. So we often have residents that point to those, but again, there's no one enforcing, there's no bylaws, there's no rules out there. That's the reason they're developing there. BC Housing has a thorough report on tiny homes. And in there, they note that one of the biggest challenges to making it implementable is the building code. And so, I mean, if anything, perhaps the board could turn to lobbying the provincial government to say, if we have a housing crisis and these are an acceptable form of housing, then why not change code or add a provision that says that local governments can issue these, rather than putting the onus on local government to find loopholes and ways of allowing something that might not be safe or might put us into a situation of liability.
Thank you, Chair Laird. So on this topic very specifically, a couple of questions have come up in our area. So where we're dealing with, and to a certain extent, this involves conversation around tiny homes, also small manufactured homes, temporary placement. And we're dealing with often 5-acre parcels, as an example, that already have water, sewer, et cetera, and are trying to create an opportunity for a family member to relocate. And so within that, if you took the term tiny home out of the equation or leave it in, just explain to me what in our current zoning. So obviously I'm talking primarily around obviously area P at this point. So it's a selfish question or self-centered question. So where does that piece fit in where there potentially enables us to allow that almost an interim situation? Have we gone through that more detailed conversation? Yes, you could do this for X amount of time. So that's where, because I am getting those types of questions.
Yes, through the chair. So the way the zoning bylaw is written now, all of our rural zones allow a single family dwelling, one single family dwelling, or one duplex, or one manufactured home. So every home can have a suite in it. You can have a duplex, so 2 dwelling units side by side, or one manufactured home. Zones, the larger rural zones that have more than 10 acres are allowed to have a separate detached dwelling unit. And in those cases, they can even have a full duplex, so 2 dwelling units connected by a common wall, plus a detached dwelling unit. So you can actually have 3 dwelling units on one property on lands larger than 10 acres. And again, we've allowed allowed secondary suites in all of our zones since 1970. So in a way, we're actually quite progressive that way. I think what we're getting more pressure on, and I'm hoping to bring a report forward to the board on that as well, is to say, what if I don't want to have the secondary suite in the home and I'd rather have the second unit, say, be it a manufactured home, detached. So I want my family on the property, but I don't want them too close, is sort of the message we're getting. And what we'd like to do is bring to the board the concept of saying, if we allow that density, if we're good with 2 dwelling units, whether they're glued together, right now they have to be stuck together, are we fine with that density if it's detached? Same number of dwelling units, it's just that it's separated. I think that's a change that the board can make. I think it makes sense. I think it's time that staff bring that forward to the board to consider. And I think that would be a, lack of a better term, an easier win because we know it meets code, or people would have to take out permits to ensure it meets code. And it allows people to have that detached unit. But what we do hear from rural residents, and this is the other side that I try to bring up too, is I also hear from people saying, we don't want more density in the rural area. That's why we moved out here. So it's trying to strike that balance. And if we allow a second detached dwelling unit, then the question might be, why can't I have a third? What if it's just temporary? So it's never perfect. And just adding to that, currently, we also have provisions on those smaller lots. If you need care of a family member, so let's say you have a family member that's ill, with a simple doctor's note and an affidavit, we can issue a building permit for a manufactured home that would be there for the length of time that the care is needed and then would have to be removed after. So we do have those provisions already. And since the board made the change, it was probably 2 years ago now where we set the bar for the second dwelling down to 10 acres. We've seen an uptake in that. So we're seeing more secondary dwelling units on those larger lots.
So on the attached duplex style, they would operate on the same systems, the same sewer system and the same water system. If you separated them apart, would they require a separate septic system and water?
Potentially, depends how far apart they're moving them. So I've seen some where they're detached, but they're close. They're just not common wall. Then they might be able to go into the one system. if people have a 40-acre lot and they're putting one home in each corner, then obviously they'll be detached. So it really depends on how they're designing it. For some folks, we've seen they really want two separate areas of the property. And in other cases, they're putting them close by. They just don't want to have a shared wall, but they'd like to have the footprint closer with all the services.
And I just have one, I know that we've already discussed OCPs, but when you're redoing the different areas that haven't had an updated OCP, these are sort of things that could come up in a discussion in your community. And I know that's the ongoing, I've moved to a rural area to not have a high density. And it's something we can look at once we get into an OCP, and then it would be current, like everybody be on the same page in your communities so you know what's available and what is possible. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Alex, would you mind just speaking? I know Alex and I have had this conversation many times about fire protection. So there's when we're in the middle of an EOC, an emergency situation, it's like, why would we put people out in this area? Why are we not putting them where, where we're creating more density in areas where we can actually better protect and keep people safe? So when we're talking about housing, we sometimes don't think about fire protection. So Alex, I know we've talked about it. Would you mind just kind of sharing your thoughts that we had discussed?
Sure, yeah. And I mean, this comes up through every EOC as well. And the province has come to us a few times and said, how did that density get out there on that one-way road in the middle of nowhere? And so, yes, it is a challenge. And I think that's where, and Director Laird just mentioned this, I think it's good to have, when we have long-range planning and we look at an official community plan, we can look at areas where more density is serviceable and where it's safe, rather than just having a blanket allowance of allowing multiple dwellings on every property through the whole regional district. Maybe there's pockets of areas that are more appropriate where they have more than a one-way in, one-way out street. But I think that's the challenge we're hearing as well is allowing more density in rural areas and putting people in areas that, they might be at risk of wildfire or flood or other risks that are out there.
Thank you. Any other questions around the tiny homes? Okay. Thanks very much, Alex. And now we get the big one, economic development. I think that's Mr. Vieira.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, EA directors. Wait for a presentation to pop up there. Right. Okay, so I'm just going to do a fairly brief just overview. Most of the information I included in the report that's in front of you. And I know this discussion, I think there'll be a healthy discussion that kind of goes all over the place following this presentation. I encourage that. But I do want to sort of set clear what the objective that we want to accomplish today, in addition to probably all the other good discussion, is for each electoral area director to at least consider, if not make a decision today, what path they want to see moving forward with the function that's set up specifically in their electoral area for economic development. So just kind of keep that in kind of back of your mind as we work through. So starting off with a bit of the background, you may have noticed that there's quite an extensive sort of background that I covered in this report. Not that I was trying to be an extra keener, but I actually happened to have written an essay on economic development in the TNRD a year and a half ago for a course that I was doing. So I already had all this background information put together. So I have to admit I did a bit of copy and paste, plagiarizing my own work for this report. So kind of a brief overview of what's in the report in more detail is, long story short, TNRD's had involvement in economic development for a very long time. Right from 1978, and for a number of years, about 12 years, there was this regional economic development function that funded these 4 sub-regional commissions that were made up of different electoral area directors and municipal directors to make decisions, my understanding is there even kind of operational decisions of what economic development was being done within those little sub-regional commissions. So that went on for a number of years. One of the things noted that I found in the research is that as often is the case, it was limited what could actually be done because there wasn't a lot of staff capacity devoted to it. So there was a lot of good discussions and ideas, but not a lot of stuff that was able to be delivered on because of that limited staff capacity. So following that, it shifted in the 1990s to a truly regional economic development model, where essentially it was delivered by the city of Kamloops. So my understanding was all electoral areas and all municipalities, including the city of Kamloops, paid into this service administered by the TNRD, and it was delivered through what is now called Venture Kamloops. I think it went through a number of different names back then. And that happened throughout the 1990s. My understanding is that over the years, there were sort of issues raised, concerns raised up and down over, is this a good model regionally? Are we as the TNRD getting good bang for our buck? Or is there too much focus on just Kamloops or just Merritt through the work that is being done there? So that discussion went on through the 90s. I think there was a lot of good work and steps made through Venture Kamloops, but ultimately at the end of the decade, the regional economic development as it was then ended. All municipalities withdrew from the TNRD function, and then a new service was created that was only electoral area specific. And that's the service that we are left with now. So the service establishment bylaw, the most recent version is the 2004 service establishment bylaw that sets the language is that the expenses for economic development within the electoral area are funded solely by the taxation from that electoral area. So long story short, each EA has its own budget ability to tax and spend for economic development for their electoral area. So the way that's been administered from 2004 up until recently to 2021, with the exception of A and B, which I'll speak to in a minute, but those budgets were set essentially in consultation between the EA director and the CFO. What do you want to see in economic development budget for next year? They budgeted that in, and it was essentially utilized as an extension of the discretionary funding. So it was funding that was granted to organizations or events that were happening in their community that the electoral area director felt was met the criteria of economic development. There was no, and there hasn't been a policy or written criteria of what it needed to meet to be considered economic development. So it put, staff, the CFO ultimately making the decision of whether or not it met the criteria of economic development. Which I'll pause there, and this is the challenge, and I think there'll be good discussion about this. Economic development means something different to everyone. It could mean anything and everything. And it's true that, you could say that a regional park is economic development. You can say tourism economic development. You could say an arts festival is economic development, but then other people think, well, no, we should be attracting industry, new mills, new mines, that sort of thing, which are very different type of work. So hence the need for sort of some clarity on what economic development means around how to spend that. And that's why in 2021, you probably heard it from both Carla and I through the budget process last year, is that we're pressing pause on any expenditures out of this because there's not clear direction on what to do with this moving forward. And we need that direction to come, well, ultimately from the board, but it's coming to this committee to make a decision on how to move forward. So I mentioned area A and B are a bit unique. So area A is a bit of both. So electoral area A historically has used economic development budgets in partnership programs with ongoing programs run by the District of Clearwater. And as well as there's some budget allocation there for the highway entrance signs into that electoral area. There is a component though within Area A that has also been a somewhat of a discretionary fund, where instead of though the electoral area director solely deciding, it was being done through the services committee to decide what an economic development programs to fund each individual year. So there was budget allocated to that. Now, electoral area B is a full economic development program that is ministered by the TNRD. So both A and B, the reason they're a little bit unique is because we've had a services coordinator position that focused, that worked out of those areas, continues to work out of those areas, Sherry Madden. So for electoral area B specifically, she's the one staff person that part of her role is to deliver an economic development, which is really a tourism marketing program for Blue River specifically. So that budget is fully is created, by staff based on the plan and based on consultation with the community of the work that's being done there. So social media, website work, trade shows, paid advertising, trail maps, all that stuff is an ongoing basis funded through this service. So this is a real success story of at least I would think I'd say it's a success story of what's being done in electoral area B. I mean, I will say electoral B just geographically is a bit unique because really there's one hub that is the tourist destination within Blue River. So even though it's an electoral area wide service, the work is focused on that community of Blue River. So I just have some snapshots here. There's the social media campaign. So this is managed, it's administered by Sherry through the Clearwater office, but they do work with a contractor who actually creates these posts and makes sure they're current and updated. I think it's a weekly post on Instagram. They have their own logo and branding, Explore Blue River, the jewel there. It's the jewel of the North Thompson. They have a nice website as well that has all the different accommodations, trail maps, things like that. And just like director, yeah, we need, they're desperate for models. So I was up there helping out. Yeah, I think it's Director Onslow and myself that take up most of the modeling on that. And dogs, yeah. So pausing on the electoral area and economic development for a moment, I also want to highlight, and doesn't need to, I don't want this to be a focus of discussion today, but there's other economic development activities that are being done through the TNRD. So Gold Country, as everyone here knows, that's also an economic development function and originally established in 91, specific to tourism and promotion of the Nicola Valley and Western TNRD. Participation of municipalities in electoral areas has fluctuated over the years, and it's come to a head this year at the end of 2023. All EAs and municipalities have gave notice to be removed from that service, so there's no budget towards that in 2024. But that did operate for a long time, and the focus was destination marketing for that area. And I should mention that I'm going to speak about Film Commission in a minute, but Terry Hadwin's here with us as well, and she has a background with Gold Country as well, and a lot of economic development experience. So I think that would be good to have her as part of this discussion today. Okay, and Scott just reminded me this. So this topic's not going to be decided today. This will be coming to the board in December for discussion on how to move forward with this. And I mentioned the Film Commission. So this is a very specific form of economic development that's been done in the TNRD for many years, I think over 20 years. Is that right? Yeah. And originally, I think it was tied to that regional economic development function. When that all changed, then the Film Commission got taken out into a separate function that was funded separately. And this is, you know, a TNRD success story through and through. We continue to have all sorts of investment for a very small actual budget from a tax base, and the amount of investment in it is huge each and every year. One more thing I wanted to mention is the Municipal Regional District Tax Program, often called just MRDT. So what MRDT is it's essentially the hotel tax. You've probably all seen it when you've stayed somewhere. So It's the authority to collect that tax is through municipalities and regional districts. That must be granted through those municipalities and regional districts. We don't receive the money, but we initially approved it where it exists in the TNRD. Once it's approved, then the money collected through the hotel tax goes directly to those organizations that have been designated by the municipality or the regional district to receive those funds. So in the TNRD, there's 4 different participating electoral areas that fund 3 different organizations. So electoral area A is standalone in Wells Gray. So it's electoral area A and Clearwater that fund Wells Gray tourism. Lower North Thompson, O and P fund that, as well as a number of municipalities, I think, fund into that. And then electoral E funds the Caribou Chilcotin Coast Association, which also includes obviously large portion of the CSRD or the CRD in that as well. So just wanted you to know from a tax point of view that it's not property taxes, it's funded by hotel taxes, but this is also economic development work being done. Interesting, you know, what I wasn't aware of until I looked into this interesting gap here is there's no MRDT in the Merritt-Nicola Valley area. So the question to consider is, should taxation for economic development continue in each electoral area? And that doesn't need to be the same for every electoral area. This is a standalone service, so it doesn't need to be a unanimous decision of how to proceed. You know, I used electoral area B for an example, that's already in place and continuing on. If everyone else wants to stop, I would be surprised if electoral area B didn't want to continue that work that's happening there. And again, when I lay out these options, consider what's best for your area. And I recognize that you may need to take this back to your communities and consider it further, or maybe you already have when you received the report. So trying to break this down into 2 scenarios. Scenario 1, we got a couple options. So the scenario 1 is cease taxation. So if we cease taxation and essentially not collect that moving forward, the question is a one-time question. What do we do with the unallocated budget to your specific electoral area? So I included in the report a table on page 19 of the whole agenda, page 5 of the report, that shows how much unallocated funding is to each electoral area. So to be clear, I call it unallocated, but it is budgeted. So this is money that was taxed for in pre-2022, because we didn't tax in 2023 for it, and there's no taxation for 2024. So this was just carryover surplus that was unspent prior to 2023 that's still sitting there. So it's in the budget available to be spent, but we haven't authorized any spending of it until we get some clear direction from the board around this. So the 2 options I'm putting forward for this are, we want to just spend that and end taxation. Propose a one-time grant and aid intake. This would be very similar to the regional grant and aid process. So we'd kind of mimic it after that. Obviously, it'd be specific to the electoral area, and it'd be specific to, as part of the application, would have to show that it's economic development related. And then we would review the intake and provide the grants and recommendation to the board to award those grants. Option 2 is do nothing. It'll end up being taken out of the budget in 2023, and it just goes as a refund to the taxpayer and reducing electoral area taxation, and then it wipes that clean. So scenario 2, you want to continue an economic development function within your electoral area. What does that look like? So option 1 is I guess the closest to what was being done in 2004 up until 2021 is essentially giving it out to organizations or events that are economic development related. But I would propose the process for that is operating it like a grant and aid program where they have to apply. It's modeled after the regional grant process that we currently have. We create a guiding policy similar to the regional intake that we already have of what it needs to, achieve in our evaluation process, and staff receive those on an annual or biannual basis, and it goes forward to the board to award that that money. The amount that gets budgeted can be in consultation with the electoral areas of how much we want, each area wants to contribute towards this economic development grant and aid program. Then option 2 is more of a long-term actual economic development plan for each area. So it would have specific deliverables and goals that would guide the budget process. So it wouldn't be a one-off changing it every year of who's getting the money. It'd be, here's what we're doing with economic development, decide what it looks like for your EA, and then it gets moved forward. And I used Area B as an example. There's an example where it's TNRD staff driven, so we need TNRD staff time devoted to it, but that run a very successful program. Another model, though, could be ongoing funding of an existing organization using Nicola Valley Tourism as an example. It could be simply, the plan could be fund this organization to the tune of $10,000 per year, require an annual report back of how they've used the money. Fairly straightforward, but then it's a plan, clear direction to staff on how that money is to be spent. So depending on what that looks like, consideration needs to be given of how much staff resources would need to be allocated to it. Just before I open up for discussion questions, what I didn't put here as a scenario, which welcome discussion on this, is the consideration of a regional economic development model. In the research that I did, TNRD spent 20 years trying to figure out how to do regional economic development, and it was a challenge. It's a very big area, very diverse industry, very diverse tourism industry, commercial industries available. So by all means, there's lots of models that can be discussed around that, but I didn't put that forward because I think that from what I saw in the past, it's not easily delivered within our regional district. So I will leave it there for discussion, questions.
Thanks, Jamie. Economic development, I've dealt with it for a long time in my career. And there's always a question, what are we getting from our economic development? If you can put a plan together similar to what's in Area B, that works very well. I know we partnered in there. We partnered with another group in town. Actually, it was trying to remember now. It was a federal government had a person that we partnered with. So it was very affordable, but there is always the discussion, what are we getting for our economic development costs? And if you can do something like Area B, that works really well. Or if you can, have as Jamie says, you find a group in your area that is already doing economic development of some kind and partner. In our area, we have Thompson, it's the Nicola Valley Tourism Group, and they've been working now for, I think, about 5 years. They now have the contract to do the economic development for the city of Merritt. So they have a good base, and they already have all the web pages and everything all up. So in my area, I would consider partnering with them because they always need funding for different projects they're working on. I'm not too sure if I would want to do it on a amount every year. It might be just on certain projects that they're working on, like they're working on a bus tour to go through our area, and they need some assistance in putting that together. Right now, they're already well on their way to doing that. So what I've noticed with because I was involved with Gold Country, there's actually two, there's Gold Trails and Gold Country in that area. Terry and I worked together years ago on Gold Country doing, we did the geocaching, and that was just an excellent program. But it's a lot of work to create that. And what I noticed when you give constant funding, I think originally the TNRD was giving them was it approximately $180,000 a year? I can't remember, $860,000, a fixed amount every year. So instead of when we started it, it was a very small amount of money. There was a lot of other work that went on. But as soon as I find, as soon as you get a set amount of money, the first thing that they want to do is hire a person to do the work, which is important if you're going to have an economic development program. But for mine, I would much rather just do it economic development on supporting an existing economic development committee within your community. That's my comments. And that, like I say, economic development, it can, you can promote business coming to your communities. You can promote tourism. You can promote growth as far as people moving into your area. And it's quite open as to what you do as far as economic development. Any questions from anybody else? Yes, Jill.
I'd just like to say that from area O, because I'm a newbie on the block, and I was very excited when I saw I had $68,000 to spend. But when you sit down and seriously look at where are you going to do this, it creates a good learning experience. And I personally, I think that all of our electoral areas are very different. That's one thing that I've really found since I've joined here. And when I was in the newspaper business, I wrote about what went on in our electoral area. We have a myriad of different events and different economic opportunities all of the time. Some are events, some are buildings, some are advertising. We have the Lower North Thompson Tourism Society, which is a huge driver now. And I was there to begin with. I'm still there. They started with nothing and now they have a huge bank account. They're paying somebody to manage. It's grown exponentially just by that starting dollars that they got. We have a number of organizations like the Outdoor Club, many different groups and organizations. And because Barrier sits in the middle of my electoral area, we get spinoffs from what Barrier does as well. The North Thompson Fall Fair organization, I've been there a long time, but this year we brought in almost $300,000 in events that have come into our community. And we haven't considered what they have spent while they were in the community. That's paying to keep our facility going. We're not paying somebody to manage it at this point in time, but that is a huge economic development. And it's so varied. I don't know how you could take all of the electoral areas and put them all in one box and say, this is what we're going to do with you guys. I think we need to keep some individualism there to have the opportunity to benefit our organizations differently, because I'm not the same as Blue River and I'm not the same as, you know, Linton or Lillooet or any of those places. We're individuals and I'm not sure that one size fits all. And I think we have to be really careful about this because what you do in your area may not fit my area at all. I'm not going to have bus tours. It's not going to happen, but it's probably really good in your area. You're not going to have a national rabbit show, but it's really good in our area. So I think that's a really important thing to consider. I would like to see some infrastructure from the dollars, but other areas might want to see just events and support and advertising and those kind of things. So that's my input.
Director Morris and then Trish after that.
Thank you, Chair Laird. Yeah, this is one's really complex. And those of you that know me know that I've spent a lifetime in between MRDTs, tourism bodies getting together and trying to cooperate. So without going into any of the nitty gritty of any of that, I think the MRDT, I mean, I guess in general, each of our electoral areas are unique in their own perspective, and that will be the number of structures that they can, structural entities like motels, that they can draw dollars from to support them, to areas that don't have any of that, but have a will to pull together on specific projects that are good for their community residents as well as the tourism sector. So I definitely, and for those of you who don't know, like literally one of my tourism territories included Valemount, all the way down to Lytton and to Merritt. I've seen that whole gamut, and that was that old high country thing that turned into something else. It turned into something else. So I think it is important that we recognize the distinction between each of these clusters of communities, whatever we want to call them, and what their goals and aspirations are. I don't see us in the economic development world necessarily. That's a personal view from myself and possibly Area P residents. But I think that the need to continue to talk about what is the best model and to help facilitate some of that by area is worth continuing to explore, because it will differ for everybody. MRDT, for example, if you were to actually implement that on all of Area P, could in fact be a significant source of revenue, given some of the structures that exist, and enough to do some small things. If we go that route, give them the option, it'll get complex for a while in terms of what are we going to do, what are we not going to do. You've got your Lower North Thompson group, you know, all of a sudden, boom, they're all over it again in terms of collection. That aside, do we look at just simply looking at our regional grants program again? We've got a program within the TNRD that essentially does what some of these ACDEV initiatives have tried to do over the years. Is there a way for us to create more flexibility into the regional grant program? And is there a way that there is some small mill rate attached to that one of the areas agrees that, yeah, we could implement that. We can call it what we want to call it. But we can get a small mill rate in towards that, and we can expand a regional grant program that works to deliver some programs by area. Sorry, that was a bit of a long ramble, but that I think it needs a lot more exploration, and it's tricky and a lot of history there, and then new ideas as well. So I hope we can leave it on the table for future discussion as well.
Okay, so I kind of agree with Director Hayward that it's too hard to do it just all across the TNRD, all the electoral areas. We're far too different. Having said that, I think I would like to see the continuation of EA-specific economic development taxation. My question would be MRDT hotel tax. I didn't see it for Area I, so I don't know if we collect it or what happens there. I can
clarify, no, it does not exist
Okay.
in those areas. So it only exists where at some point it was authorized by the local government, and it's all of Area O and P are included in North Thompson, all of Area B all of Area A and E
Okay.
are the only ones included.
Interesting, because I think I don't really want to see it all gone and just doing a grant and aid application. Maybe that is the way to go. Maybe looking at multi-year economic development for the area. But I think it needs a bit more exploration and talking to residents to see. But I really think we need to have some kind of economic development. It definitely in Area I, if you look at the taxation, I think I've got one of the larger areas and one of the lower tax contributions. So we need those jobs. We need the economic development, however we go about it. But I think we definitely need to look at doing something to help our residents.
Director Council.
Thank you for that. I just have a question for Jamie, and it's just on the MRDT. What are the limitations of that tax? Like if say Area B were to implement that, who sets where that funding goes? Does it go to economic development? Does it go specifically to trails networks or whatever project the community should have, et cetera?
Maybe Director Morris will help me answer this question. She probably knows better than me. I don't have a lot of background on it, but my understanding is that, yeah, the authority to establish it is with the local government, but then it gets allocated to an organization that they spend it. So it's basically making the decision. You're allowed, Wells Gray Tourism, you're allowed to implement this hotel tax and you get to receive all the money directly and use it. Like, we don't see it or touch it, but we authorize it. And it's a one-time authorization. And that's actually kind of a spin-off discussion that probably needs to be considered is, area O and P, for example, it's authorized by the TNRD. Does North Thompson Tourism report back to this board of what they're doing with that money? They're not currently doing that. We haven't requested that recently. It's kind of a disconnect that maybe we need to reconnect. And some of those MRDT organizations do a better job of that, but I think they do a good job of communicating to the hotels who are collecting the tax. But I think there's, generally speaking, sometimes a forgotten connection that it was the local municipality or electoral area that authorized it in the first place. Is that correct, Director Morris? Anything to add to that of how you understand it functions?
No, thank you. The conundrum a little bit that happens, but probably not in the smaller EAs is the amount of hotel rooms as an example, or fixed roof accommodation that's out there on a commercial basis. And what is that meaningfully going to generate? And that's why some have not gone down that route, whereas others have. And the hotel sector, in terms of one of the or the accommodation group or cluster, whatever you want to call them, they have a vote essentially on whether to go forward with that as well. But for areas where there is enough of taxation revenue for hotel tax, as it were, accommodation tax, it can create a pool of dollars that you can really be targeting. The types of initiatives, that will generate economic development and spin-off for your community. So it's always worth exploration, in my view.
I had experience of putting MRDT in Merit, and it's not easy to do. You have to have the support of, I think it's 51% of the total rooms in your area that you're going to include in the hotel tax, as they call it. We tried, I think it took us 3 tries to get it approved in Merit, because we never got the right number of the support from the Hotel Motel Association that actually provides the funding. It's in place now, but it's not working at all right now, but they do have that in Merit. And it is a complicated process. It has to be approved by the provincial government. And the Hotel Motel Association gathers the money and sends it to the provincial government. And then it comes back to, it comes back to the regional district, and then they distribute it to the whatever association or society is looking after your that particular tax. So it can get complicated.
Just a clarity on that Director Laird, yes, it goes to the province and then it goes to the association directly. So it doesn't come through us at the TNRD. We don't see it. Yeah.
It's just the reporting that's required back to the TNRD on how the money's spent. Yeah.
I just want to add that the Lower North Thompson Tourism Society, I'm actually on the board. I had no idea they were not reporting, so I will make sure they do. That is what set that society into a position where they can create their own summer guide. They have done incredibly well through that hotel tax. And they partnered with some of the hotel motels up on Highway 24. And they also partnered, I think, with one of the hotels in Kamloops. So I don't quite know how that worked, but that increased their hotel motel dollar value. And so that those organizations are included in all of the advertising and all of the promotion that they do. And it's been highly successful for a community that really had 3 little dinky hotel motels. So it can be worked out if anybody's thinking about that. And that's been a big, strong one for them.
And just to follow up, I wasn't meaning to suggest that they were like deficient in reporting requirements, but it's just I think what it's evolved is a disconnect between the TNRD and what they're doing and how the MRDT works.
And I will mention that to them. Yeah.
Okay, I've got quite a list of speakers. Director Smith.
Thank you, Chair.
Is there a way that we can get some information, actually detailed information as to what hotels and motels are contributing? Or is it if you're a motel or hotel, you're automatically contributing? And what about places like guest ranches and that sort of thing? Who decides who is and who is in?
I don't know the answer to that, but everything I learned was from the provincial website around this, so I can send a link to that, and it includes a map showing what areas are covered. But I think any approved accommodation automatically pays into that, is my understanding. So if it was, yeah. So if it was an approved guest ranch through like a certified accommodation, then they should.
Through to Carla Fox. Any other comment?
Thank you, Chair, through to the board. So in my time in Fernie as a resort municipality, it was something that they were looking at and did. And although the hotels have to opt into it, they're still collecting a tax from the people staying there. They don't directly contribute and lose revenue per se. So they just have to agree to charge this tax to the guests that stay at the hotel. And then that money they collect based on that tax gets remitted. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
Just one of the things we experienced in Merritt was the hotel and motels were collecting the tax and not forwarding anywhere. And it's actually, they kept the money, and it's really hard if they're not prepared to send the money into the provincial government to enforce. So, you know, that was one of the problems we ran into, and that's probably why it's not functioning now. Director Grenier, and then.
Thank you, Chair. In 1994, I was sitting in an office in Toronto, and I got a phone call saying there's a piece of ground in a place near Kamloops. You should go take a look at it. It's on a lake. So looking at my experience, I knew nothing about Kamloops, nothing about the interior. And now I'm on an airplane on my way to a place called Kamloops. And so in terms of my due diligence, that's what I was coming out to take a look at the property, but to learn about Kamloops. And I met, I think it was Mike O'Reilly at the time, but it was at Venture Kamloops. Along the way, I met Lee because you were involved with a tourism function. There was no film commission, but there was a fellow named Reno Elverhoy at the old TNRD building. And Reno is, if you're into country music and country shirts and country outfits, Reno was the economic development officer for the TNRD. But my job and what I was interested in was gathering information and building my learning curve about this area. So takeaway pieces, what, you know, there was the Wanda Sioux in Kamloops, but there wasn't a single thing that talked about Kamloops Lake. Oh, well, when you finally started talking about it, it was a polluted lake. You don't want to go into it and it's lousy and so on and so forth. All this information is really great information, and having a central point where somebody like me was trying to learn about the area, pieces of paper and little file. It was before, you know, it was early computerization. I don't think there was any USB thing, but eventually there was. And so it's the gathering of information, the learning about your areas that is useful. And if there is something from this experience where we have fact sheets about the areas, or we have something that highlights our areas, I think that would be a very useful function. I met at the Cigar Building, I think that's what they call it, in Kamloops, the redone building right across from City Hall. I learned about industry and I learned about everything. And then I went out and I looked at things. And so it's really useful that there was a person that could speak and promote the area. That was useful to me. Then I ultimately bought the property and, you know, was moving forward. Reno was still the economic development officer. Cammy the Fish was still a marketing thing in Kamloops, but neither of those things were anything that I could use because they were dated, they were old school. I was looking for something that was more progressive. And about that time, the TNRD had decided They were building this building. They wanted to change the focus from what Reno was doing. And they had a guy named Danny Virtue who was proposing building a film studio. And so in 1989, they said, well, we're going to create this film thing. We don't know if we're going to go with it long term. You're doing your thing over there. Danny's doing his thing over there. Vicky Weller's interested in film. Let's put together a board that can market stuff. And I think that the reason the TNRD went that direction is that they could make some determination. Are we going to get films here? If we do, then maybe it's worthwhile and it's paying. We can't really figure out whether Reno Elverhoy is attracting anything that's business. Like you say, it's very difficult to associate the activity and whether it's useful. So I think having information that newbies coming to this area can gather and take away with them, that's a useful function. I'm not sure that sitting in an office in country western outfit markets, Jill's place or Lee's place. I don't think it highlights that. So, but now fast forward to today, I'm just learning today that all those wonderful pictures, that great website stuff that Lee has been putting out, I'm looking, I said, geez, Lee's doing a hell of a job marketing Blue River and all the rest of it. And now I learned that there's a concerted function. They've hired these models, Jamie and Lee, and they've gone out and they're doing great things. So information wise, tourism marketing wise, becoming aware there is a function, but how you handle that, and maybe through Terry and maybe through the Film Commission, we got some great pictures that was very useful to me. And when I was financing things, and I've got bankers coming out from Toronto, I'm piling on the area stuff. They're doing their due diligence on me, and they're doing due diligence on the area. So there is a function, but boy, oh boy, it's really hard to put your finger on dollar for value and what it is. But just base information about this area. If you don't have that, then it's really tough for a guy to come in and assess it other than just his eyeballs and his meetings. So if that's helpful in our discussion about what do we do.
Director Thorpe.
Thanks. This goes back, well, I've got a couple things. MRDT hotel tax. You said that you thought potentially guest ranches were charged because they were an approved accommodation. And then you also made a comment about fixed roof. And so this is where I'm trying to wrap my head around. If we were looking at that from an area director's point of view, what about campgrounds? What about things that are set up, say cabin tents or teepees that are set up for the season? Would they count as hotel tax? Do you know? That's question one.
Same answer. I'm not positive. My understanding that it would be approved accommodation, like you see that little sign, VC
Yeah.
accommodation. So someone that's approved, whether it's through having tents, cabins, or a hotel, I think that would still classify. But things like Airbnbs and all these other things probably wouldn't. Campgrounds, I don't think pay in, no. So in your area, like the Kumsheen rafting is an approved accommodation. They would pay in, but a campground wouldn't.
Okay.
So back to Director Morris's point, just for consideration, for everyone's food for thought is around how much accommodation is even in your area? What does that money look like?
Yeah, okay. So that's question one. And I have seen campgrounds that are approved accommodations. So I'm wondering, I think in tour guides or something. Anyway, that's question one. Question two, would there be any reason why we as area directors couldn't try to bring together some people within our own areas and ask them what they think of economic development and what they would like to see, and kind of potentially use that to figure out which direction we wanted to go, and potentially set up our own sort of volunteer dev group?
So Good question. I think that what you're suggesting maybe falls into this kind of option two. Essentially having a plan, because what we're looking from a staff point of view is having clear direction. If we're taxing for this, we need to make sure we're accountable as an organization to everyone that we're collecting this tax for a specific reason, and here's what's being done with that money. So if what you're suggesting is, creating a volunteer group that maybe makes decisions and have some operational decisions, that would be under this economic development plan of what that group is, what their authority is, who gives them authority, what the budget is, that whole piece. So cautiously, I'm saying that I think what you're suggesting could fit into this. It would be registered society. What does that look like? There needs to be some accountability on there, but there's potential to sort that out. Yeah.
So could we, as area directors, sort of have an informal, bring a bunch of them together, have an informal discussion, get this kind of rounded out a bit better, and then potentially move on to that next step that you're referring to?
Yeah, I think that's what all of you guys could take home as homework to think about, really. And we don't want to drag this on, but what direction do you want to go? And just kind of to add to the comment about, being a registered society under that model, what it would look like would be a contract between the TNRD and this organization. So if that organization doesn't exist yet, and the people in the community, even if you want to organize creation of one, I mean, it would be a contractual relationship between the TNRD and that society that's delivering that and accountable for the funds under contract that we're giving them.
Director Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question will be for Mr. Vieira. If we go with option one, which looks to me like the one that I've been using for years, and now I don't know, would there be a list of different items we could use the funds for?
Thanks for that, Director Graham. And I think I maybe should have clarified here in the point form a little better. The idea of the difference with option one than what we've previously been doing is previously it's been the discretion of the area director of deciding, I want to give this funds to these groups doing economic development. The model after our regional grant and aid process is that those groups would apply for the grant funding, and then we'd use the policy to review those grant applications. So you as the area director don't directly decide who gets the money. It's a process that's already predetermined, a policy set by the board. You by all means go advertise and remind those folks, hey, the grant intake's open, get in your application in the next 6 weeks before the closing date, and it'll be reviewed and approved, awarded by the board. So that's the difference.
So how long will it take? Like, I have a lot of funds at my disposal, but I don't know where I can use them, and I'd like to use them to encourage growth in the Nicola Valley. How long is it going to take for this to show up, and so you can tell me, well, this is what you can use it for? Thank you.
So good question. I think going back to the original question to determine is this a one-time thing? Do you want economic development to continue to be taxed in your area? Or do you want to end taxation and spend the money that's currently sitting there? So if you want to spend the money that's currently sitting there and stop collecting taxation for it, then what I'm hearing from your area is interested in a one-time grant and aid intake. We could set that up in the winter, spring, advertise it as part of the regional grant and aid, saying there's a secondary intake for economic development as a one-time thing. And then those applications can be received and spent this year. Or if you want to continue it, then we set up something similar, but on an ongoing basis.
I would like to personally continue with it. I do have a little bit of a problem with advertising that the money is there, because then you got all kinds of yo-yos showing up wanting the money.
Right.
Whereas I know what my valley, my area needs. And the odd folk some folks will come to me and suggest that this is what we should do. And sometimes Director Laird and myself will drive around looking where we need to do those things. So the advertising, I'm a little tough one, but I do like to continue to tax. Thank
you. Go ahead.
Just one quick thing. So in area B, we had a services committee, and Yusuf, your area still has those committees, and those committees helped guide the program that we are taxing for and how that money was to be spent. I'm not sure whether yours does, but anyway, it is a meaningful program, but I think as the director, even in my case, I'll be speaking with Sherry Manna just to see if we can maybe tweak a few things or try to get more engagement on the social media posts, et cetera. Like I look at, our Explore Blue River, and you talk about the reach that it has, and we have 619 followers. So is that worth the money versus Mike Quigley's helicopter skiing with 11,000 followers who are seeing promotional information, or Sled Blue River with 3,000 followers. So it's how do you extend that reach and make it valuable for the taxpayer? And this program does other things other than their social media, but it is something that I think as the director, you should be involved and be questioning and seeing where areas could be improved.
Lee, I'm just interested, is there a paid person there or is it all volunteers?
This is paid. So we have Sherry Madden as the TNRD services coordinator. So that is a portion of her salary and time is dedicated to that, as well as a social media company is paid to come up with our pamphlets, our designs, their posts on a weekly basis. The photographer was a professional photographer who has come out. He is a paid position, and all of that comes from the taxation. So on my last taxes, I'm paying $7.50 per 100,000 of assessed value as a residential person, and I don't know whether that applies to the businesses. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I can speak to this from a budget point of view. So 2024, the taxation is $63,000. So it's an electoral area-wide taxation. All areas or all properties pay into it. And just to highlight some things, so the social media marketing campaign, $12,000 a year. Facebook ads, $100 a month, design ads, $500, paid advertising, $900 a month, photography, one-time $5,000, blog posts, $1,000. So a lot of those are built into the contract for the social media company, but just giving a sense. So the total budget for 2024 is about $50,000 spending on paid advertising, all that work that you're seeing, website development, maintenance.
Just my question to you, that's the residents portion. Do the utilities and the businesses pay into that additionally or no?
The 63,000 taxation is the total taxation collected. So in your area, it's quite a small portion that the residents pay into. The majority is paid in by utilities and business.
Are you looking for a recommendation coming from this meeting today as to where we want to go as a EA directors?
So I think the best way to deal with this is there's been some good discussion here. And I think some directors, I'm getting the sense some directors want to maybe digest this and think about it further. So I think what I'll do is I'll follow up with you. Ultimately, we want to bring a recommendation to the board, and it will be, it may be different for each electoral area. But what I want to get is direction from each electoral area, what they want to see moving forward. And then I can basically put that into a table and bring that forward to the board. So I'll follow up this with sort of an email, another homework assignment from me that I'll send to you guys to consider with a deadline of maybe giving some direction by the time of the next board meeting in December. Would that be reasonable?
And Director Houghton, pardon me.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have just looking at these amounts that are remaining to be spent. It looks like Director Morris and I have the least. I don't think either one of us have much in the way of accommodations in our area. We're all rural based. You know, you look at ours, the the Westwolds of the world, or the Pritchards, or Turtle Valleys, or Deloros. And I'm with Director Graham. I would like to see us probably continue, but the directors I'd like to see have a say in where this money goes. And, you know, it doesn't look like we have a lot in our area, but instead of just having an advertising campaign and come and get her boys, I think for R2A, or at least for our area, continue it, but I think I would just like to see it added into the grant, maybe an aid intake, or have us say, I'd like to give some money to Provincial Winter Fair, Ag Expo, or something like Jill and I did this year out of this spot. I mean, that was our discretion. I think both of them went to a good cause, so yeah, that's what I want to say. Thanks.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Thanks through to Director Houghton. And that's a good comment. I'm glad you brought it up. I want to clarify that the other thing to consider here is that there is the discretionary funding. So this is completely separate from the discretionary funding. And so, you know, if the desire is to continue with just this discretionary funding model that essentially was what was happening for the last 15 years, then I would propose in those areas that want to go that way, then you could end economic development function, stop taxing for it. You know, we could tax more for discretionary funding. That's always an option too within that model. It's this lack of sort of clear policy is what we were doing was having economic development money and discretionary funding, and we were using it the same. So it didn't feel right and didn't look right. So that's just food for thought around the discretionary funding piece, because that's not proposed to change here. That's going to exist. That's in the budget. Another piece to consider, again, looking at that funding, the unallocated funding, that's unallocated funding currently in the electoral area budgets, which means no taxation for your electoral area. So something to think about is if you want this considered, currently we have no additional taxation built into that. So if those areas that don't have any allocated or very limited want that increase, then that's an increase to the budget that's been proposed that would end up in the final budget.
I know, like, right before our two fairs, Jill and I wanted to give something to each of our fairs, and I believe Scott and Carla found $2,500 in each of our EA, economic development pots, to give to our two fairs. So, I mean, that was a decision that Director Hayward and I made on our own.
Director Graham, you had a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for Jamie again. Are you going to contact each EA director individually about this? Asking the question, do you want to continue?
Yes, I'll do that through an email that you'll all get, and I'll just kind of clarify what response that I want back, and happy to have further discussion if you guys have further questions.
And the other one was, if only myself wanted to stay with the taxation, would I still be able to do that?
Yes, it's independent. Each electoral area can stay the
And
same.
one last question. I like your suggestion that you don't need economic development and discretionary. The funds that I have, I think it's $40,000. Can that be transferred into discretionary right now?
Thank you, Chair, through to the directors. So I think if you were to say, you know, I want to allocate the rest of this money, I don't want to continue with economic development. And then in 2024, I'd like to look at increasing my discretionary and not have this separate pot of money, which just makes it clean. There's already a policy for discretionary funding.
Yeah.
So that's nice. You don't have to wait for that. I think we're amenable to that remaining portion, allowing the discretionary kind of follow that discretionary policy and have you allocate the remainder of the funds. And then that's the end of it. I think the wild card is if it continues on and you want this discretionary economic money, we need a policy to guide that. So and as Jamie has said, if you go into an agreement with a group, there's a contract and it's defined and there's rules and parameters around how that money's spent. Great, that's clear. If you don't want to have a group and you want economic development, you want it to be variable, then we need a policy that helps staff kind of administer those funds. So the remaining portion, if you would like to just be able to have that allocated out, as long as the board's amenable, we just kind of follow the discretionary parameters, allow you to do that. Have zero taxation for economic development going forward. Hopefully, Jamie, that's okay.
Maybe I could just ask, after listening to the conversation, could we just have a show of hands of how many people want to continue with an economic development program? Does everybody want to continue with economic development and create a policy around how it works? And then you don't have to worry. Yours is all done, Lee. Yeah. Council. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I'd like more time to go back to my community and talk to actually my predecessor and just understand first before I commit to that. Is that okay?
And just listening to this discussion, it sounds like most of the directors would like to continue with economic development. And we're quite aware that we need a policy if we're going to do that. If we go under the grant and aid policy, that would have to be changed because they really recommend that it's you try and give to one group only. And they preferably like to see a different organization get to discretionary funds. And we find that might be something we need to look at in our policy because we have a very hard time actually doing that because we have such a small group of people. Go ahead, Carla.
Thank you, Director Laird. So just to be clear, say Director Graham, Director Houghton, and Director Morris, they have a separate economic development function. It's not regional. So if they want to do something different with their program, that's different from Director Thorpe and Hayward and the rest, I think they probably can under the model that is there right now. So if for some reason they want to discontinue with economic development in that area, they could stop contributing to that economic development function, correct?
All areas can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Would you look at increasing the discretionary funds then in that case?
if that was their request.
Go ahead. Oh. Go ahead, Director Morris.
Thank you. I think my question has been answered, but it does seem to me that for simplicity purposes, is it an option to simply have the discretionary fund by electoral area expanded to include what we're calling economic development, but we're getting all wrapped up in terminology and nobody really actually understands what the parameters of economic development are, frankly, including me. So could we make it simple and simply expand the parameters of the discretionary fund based on finding a way that if we want to draw in funding support from certain areas, that's an option. So I'm just putting that out there, and then we're really kind of just talking about one thing.
Director Grenier.
For my area, I would be interested in nominal funding. I would rather give the money back to the taxpayers, but I would be interested in a fact sheet or some coordination, perhaps through the Film Commission, because there's wonderful brochures and information. So if somebody came to this area, said, tell me about your area, Jay, there'd be a fact sheet. But if I'm looking for a low-cost solution organized by existing TNRD, because in my area, I think our proximity to Kamloops, they're going to be spending a lot of time in Kamloops at the Economic Development Office in Kamloops in the Chamber of Commerce. But that would be entirely different if you were going up to Blue River. And maybe we want to have some kind of cross coordination or opportunity on a website, because when I came here, there was no such thing as a website. Now there's fabulous pictures out of the Film Commission, and you've done a heck of a job for your area. So I'd be interested in something that might be fact driven and low cost.
Director Smith.
Yeah, just a quick point. Personally, I think I could have more impact on my area if it was an increased discretionary rather than having to limit limit the whole conversation around economic development. I just think, I think it would be more impactful for me to be going to the community with all sorts of ideas that some may end up being tied to economic, but right at the point when you're talking and you don't have that specific economic development program or project, at least you can start, you know, you can start working around it and in a different way, and you can start promoting other types of business with that money. I'd prefer it to be added to the discretionary.
So what I'm hearing here in the follow-up email that I send out, I'm gonna add a third option here. So under scenario one, where we cease taxation for economic development, then the third option would be, we're still ceasing taxation for economic development, but an increase to discretionary funding.
I've just got a comment of, if I decided that I wanted to partner to Thompson-Nicola Valley and it was an ongoing contract, how do you get that in discretionary funds? Because right now that doesn't work.
Correct, and I wouldn't propose to do that under discretionary funds. So the scenario you're talking about would be under option scenario two. We're going to continue taxation for economic development, and under option two, we're going to create a plan. The plan is, in what you're suggesting is a fairly simple plan. Enter into a contract with an existing destination marketing organization, and we'll create that contract. We'll set the value. It'll be reporting parameters and everything to cover off that we're accountable to the taxpayer, what we're using these funds for. It's in contract, and then we set it in budget every year, and it's a one-time payment or whatever the terms of the contract is.
So that would be a separate line item in my local budget, my
Yeah,
area budget.
it would be the line item under economic development. We'd be taxing for whatever that amount is. And then the accountability for it is, we don't need a policy because it's built into a contract as an operational cost.
Yeah. Director Graham, Herb Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm up to same thinking as Director Smith, that increase in economic development in the discretionary is by far easier to use, and it sounds to me like it would be simpler for administration and finance to deal with, drop the economic development and move it to discretionary. Is that right?
I guess it depends what the intent is. If it's easier to just spend the money that way, yes. But if the intent is to provide economic development and say we're providing economic development in the region, discretionary funding is not economic development. So that's why we're saying if you wanted more money for discretionary funding, don't call it economic development. If we want to do economic development, that's a different discussion. And that's why we're going to add that third option. If you want to tax more just for discretionary funding, that's an option. It's only impacting your taxpayers, no one else in the TNRD if you want to increase that budget.
Thank you. I think that would work better for area N. Simply because I've got that economic development funds there and I haven't used it for several years. But we use it discretionary every year.
The one question I have right now, Herb and I both support the fall fair and the rodeo and garlic festival on a yearly basis, but we take it out of our discretionary funds. And that's in those particular societies are basically expecting, I think we give $500 right now. And so it'd be $1,000 per society. So how would you, right now, I don't think our discretionary funding allows you to do a repeat every year. Maybe that's a question for Carla.
Okay, give us a second on that. That's discretionary funding policy. It's not fresh in my mind. But I mean, under that scenario, Director Laird, there's a few different scenarios. There is a mechanism to set up ongoing grant and aid functions as well. That's separate from discretionary funding and separate from economic development. There's areas where there's ongoing grant and aid services that are established. So if there's something that you want to permanently establish a service for ongoing grant and aid, like we do, for example, in some areas for community halls, then that's a third option. Again, separate from the economic development discussion, but a way to fund things on an ongoing basis.
I know two of them that we fund ongoing is a museum and the Community Art Council. And that's done every year. So it's that would follow probably similar.
Yeah, that's a perfect example in your area. There's two grant, and thanks for reminding me, there's two areas that it's a grant and aid permanently set up to fund the museum and archives in Nicola Valley. And so it's a straightforward, we know exactly what that money's for. It's allocated every year. They receive it every year, report back.
Thank you. Any other questions on round? So we'll look forward to your email and everybody can respond and let you know how we're looking at it. Any other discussion? Thanks, everybody. Interesting conversations. And so we go to 4. Yeah, gee, it's 5.3 firefighter remuneration. I can get that great. I've been saying enough remunerations.
Yes, and before we jump into that, does the chair, now would be a time for a break if the chair wants to call a break, otherwise we can continue.
Sure, that's fine.
Truck along.
We can have a break. Sounds good. Probably lots of coffee over there to drink.
Carrie, matching grants.
I guess I think we'll get rolling. I don't know how much long Jamie needs to explain about fire remunerations. If everybody wants to take the seat, we'll let Jamie give us all the good news.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually going to turn it over to Jason Tomlin, our Manager of Fire Protection Services. Just before I pass it over to him, the report in your agenda package really speaks in more detail about the process that we went through. And just to be crystal clear, the changes that we made, so this is an operational guideline that we use. We have operational guidelines that determine how all of the TNRD administered fire departments operate. So this is one that's specific to remuneration that we've amended. So the costs that are associated with this increase in pay are already included in the draft, the provisional budget that was presented to this board. So nothing that we're presenting today is proposing any further changes to the existing budget for each fire department. With that, I will turn it over to Jason.
Good morning. So for this report, I think as I try to explain it, I'll give some context, but I think we need to go backwards a bit before we kind of get the context of what we're asking for or what we've developed and put forward into a budget. So back in 2014, the TNRD had 3 fire departments. And at that time, we decided, and to be frank, before that, we pretty much ignored them as a regional district. We just gave them a check every year and wished them good luck. And they did, I think, some high level financial reporting back to our finance officer, and then they got and received another check for the next operational year. So it was around 2014, we decided we needed to share some more love into our fire departments and not quite ignore them in that same fashion. And so we just started building essentially relationships with the chief and chief's officers and trying to understand what their challenges are. Also, you know, what predicated this was the playbook from the Office of the Fire Commissioner that was coming in 2015. So we knew there was some stuff that needed to be done. We needed to be a little bit more hands-on. So we were trying to be proactive and get in front of this a bit and build those relationships with our regional district fire departments. So in 2014, when we kind of opened the cupboard doors in all the fire departments, we recognized that the remuneration rates, as they were left to each fire department to create within their internal committees, went, well, it was all over the map between the 3, from having nothing to having something. And we also had the accident insurance piece that was with 2 different providers for 2 of the fire departments and nothing for a 3rd fire department. So we reviewed all that and put it all on the same level. We created a consistent remuneration model, which is still the one we use today, and created one funding or one source from an accident insurance provider. So it was consistent with all 3 fire departments. So moving forward into 2015, the Office of Fire Commissioner pulled the trigger on the playbook. This was, you know, somewhat new to all of us. And out of that, obviously we have the minimum standards for structural firefighting in BC. They also created a definition of authority having jurisdiction, which really puts everyone accountable that was managing fire services in the province. So from there, again, we're all learning this. We're still building relationships with our regional district fire departments. Outside of the TNRD piece, society-run fire departments and member municipality fire departments and improvement district fire departments all have the same challenge. So the society-run fire departments started talking to the TNRD saying, hey, this is getting too complicated. Are you guys interested in maybe looking at incorporating our fire department in with the TNRD managed ones to add some consistency and take away that large liability that comes with running the fire service, which got us into 2017. And I'm getting to the remuneration piece, I swear. Which got us into 2017, where we decided to hire a consultant to review not only where we've become from our 3 fire departments from essentially 2015 to 2017, because there's all these checks and balances that we had to make sure we're trying to be compliant with the province. But at that time, we also opened the door for member municipalities, improvement districts and societies to come on with this consultant for economies of scale. Since they're coming, to the regional district, they might as well look at as many as possible. So with that, there was 11 different fire services with a mix of societies, improvement districts and member municipalities, along with the TNRD, that did this overarching review. And there was a number of key points that came out of that. 10 to be precise, and I'll read them off here. That's organizational and legal structure, impact and implementation of the Office of the Fire Commissioner's Playbook, mutual aid agreements, training standards, accountability systems, occupational health and safety, fire department record systems, standards of service, fire underwriter survey, and recruitment and retention were kind of the 10 key pieces that came out of that. So obviously we're talking about remuneration today. So we're going to focus on the recruitment and retention piece. That's where that compensation model lives. And with that, some of the issues that are out there, not just in the regional district, but this goes, across Canada, is the time commitment to be trained and compliant in a fire service is absolutely massive. And that also comes with the challenge of trying to retain firefighters and attract them, quite frankly, because not a lot of people have that much time on their plate anymore to give to that service and that level of training. Dual working families was another element that came to the forefront, is that people just are busy in their lives and they don't have a lot of time. So if they're going to do something, it's got to be pretty special to them personally to be able to make that commitment. Aging population was another one. And trying to retain younger people in rural areas because they tend to move away for other opportunities that exist in bigger municipalities and other parts. Employers, and maybe a bit of a change in this, is employers may have in the past been a little bit more able to allow their employees to leave work to go participate when their pager goes off to suppress fires. That is a pretty common thread that's been changing too, and that probably has a whole other discussion on why that is happening, but that's a reality that even if you are a firefighter in this non-career fashion, your employer is not allowing you to leave your workplace to go and engage in that activity. So those are some of the challenges. Some of the solutions obviously came forward that if we can be very organized and well equipped to deliver training, it can be more succinct and efficient, and therefore when people give their 2 hours weekly, that they're not feeling they're wasting their time because they show up to practice and everyone's very organized and they can execute that in an efficient manner. In-house and flexible training modules that we can do online. It also allows people the ability to do some training from home, essentially, where they don't have to be at the station all the time, when they can do a lot of that theory online and then obviously go and do the practical component as well. Another solution that came up, and we personally, like from the TNRD lands, haven't exercised this one, but I find it interesting, is recognize employers that support firefighters, and that could probably go in a number of different ways. What that looks like, from a simple recognition from social media to plaques on the wall in their place of business to identify that they're supportive of their community fire departments. And meaningful compensation, this is coming around to why I'm standing here today. So from 2017 on that initial consultant report, to date, we continually work on all those 10 key areas, and compensation was one that we've recently came to the forefront, where we had the ability to make a working group of TNRD fire chiefs with staff and discuss, that initial remuneration that I mentioned we still use today, that was created in 2014. Now we're in 2023, touching on 10 years from when that was looked at. to move forward and make a more of a meaningful remuneration model. So as we got together, there's a lot of great ideas that came out. One was health and dental. That's one thing that currently isn't offered, and some fire chiefs thought that might have been a good attraction retention piece that would be added. Hourly pay versus flat pay or flat rate pay, which is what we currently do. Pay periods, we do them quarterly now, but because of the amount of call outs and people that do lose income when they go to these call outs, a monthly pay structure would be more advantageous to them because they still have bills to pay at the end of the month, and quarterly just doesn't quite work for them. So the other thought that was put out there was paying members for their daily job work hours when they leave their job. It came out there, as a discussion point. Another reality in daycare and babysitting coverage. A lot of people, if they go out or they have young kids, they need to hire a babysitter, and need to also, that's out of pocket pay for them to go into these community, services. And really the list went on. It was great discussions and some serious challenges. So the other piece we did is reviewed other regional districts' remuneration models, as we don't want to reinvent the wheel if something is already there. And so we pretty much went around the horn of the TNRD to Fraser Fort George, Caribou Regional District, Fraser Valley Regional District, Columbia Shuswap Regional District, and North Okanagan Regional District. I guess they're regional district of North Okanagan, just to be different than everyone else. But and then we decided that the framework was the CSRD's model was not only the best fit, but it was also the most current, that they had just went through this whole process last year and updated what they thought was going to be a meaningful framework. So we use that, and that's what you see before you in these reports, is basically that framework, with it being curtailed to what the working group with the TNRD fire chiefs and the staff have come forward to put together and include it into next year's budget. And with, I guess that my last comment is, the objective of this isn't anything more than to help people not be out of pocket to be part of their community fire departments. And that's all I have, just as that kind of 80,000 foot level overview of where we were and where we are now.
Mr. Chair, just looking at the charts breakdown there, does that include highway rescue as well? Having, Baven B and Blackpool in Area A that has a highway rescue, is that apply to them, like the equivalent team leader and such? Thank you.
Great question through the chair. Absolutely, it does. We have two road rescue groups, Baven B and Blackpool, and those remuneration rates are inclusive of those call outs as well. And on that note, we do receive recovery money from the province for those road rescue call outs as well. So those items are factored
in. Director Ansel.
Thank you. I just would like to say I wholeheartedly support this, absolutely, because it is a hardship on the firefighters. And I'm curious, do you predict in the future that these positions would no longer be volunteer positions, and that we would eventually have to move to a model where they are paid firefighters because of the lack of time that people have to volunteer because they're working too many jobs to afford food?
Absolutely. Another great question. And I guess what we've done here is we've gone to a paid per call model. So the term volunteer firefighter, I think, is disappearing again across the country. The new reality is we have career firefighters and non-career firefighters, and the non-career firefighters are obviously not drawing a living wage from doing this, but they are obviously receiving a meaningful remuneration model, so they're not bringing money from home to allowing this to succeed.
If I can add to that, I mean, we have some examples with our fire departments where, you know, especially with the, you know, the fire chiefs that put in more time, that in some cases this is a component of their income. So it's not their full-time job, but it makes up a component of maybe 3 different part-time jobs, and the fire chief is one of them. So that's where I see, and we see this going, is that, yeah, maybe it's not, or it'll be a long time before it's a full-time position, but recognition that this actually could make up an actual significant portion, not just a tiny little side of your, you know, a small token amount.
Director. I'll just say Julie.
I think this is really great because my husband was a firefighter and I've been part of that family for a long time. I think that we are really getting close to making them all professionals, but I just have one question. Out of our 9 fire departments, everybody is showing on this table 3 an increase in the remuneration budget, but Little Fort sits at $16,000 in both places. Is that a typo? Is that really where they're going to stay?
Is not a typo, and you're right. When I was looking at this as well, I was like, well, that definitely red flags. But the reason Little Fort is at that number currently is they have low roster numbers and they have low call-outs essentially.
Okay.
With their service area, so that what we had budgeted previously still works with that.
Still works. That's great. Saving money.
Director Smith and then Director Howell.
Hi, Jason. Thank you, Chair. You mentioned about the compensation from the province for highway rescue. Can you expound on that a little bit?
If you're a registered road rescue group within the province, there is a remuneration model the province has for that service. And it's an hourly call out and they're paged out. I mean, there's, so I guess that's the high level of it. Is what the rate is off the top of my head. I think it's $384 an hour, which is all inclusive of the equipment, the truck and the crew.
Sorry, how many of our hauls so it has to be a specialized crew? You have to be registered as road rescue?
That's correct.
And how do they get that accreditation?
Through EMCR. So I wanted to say EMBC because it used to be EMBC until recently. It's EMCR, but so that model is through one of the public safety lifeline volunteers that the province supports, such as search and rescue, ESS, road rescue is one of those, and has a specific remuneration model for that service.
So obviously the proximity to a highway or whatever would be one of the prerequisites. For instance, South Green wouldn't have it. Or would they?
That is correct. South Green does not have it. That is
because they don't respond to
road rescue from a mapping standpoint is covered out of Clinton. They go north and they meet up with 100 miles. So that area is fully covered between those 2 fire departments.
Thank you.
Director Howden.
2 things. Great job on this. I think that you've done a great job creating this document and some remuneration for the people that deserve it. Gets back to the previous question. The Monty Creek and the Pritchard Fire Hall, with their close proximity to Highway 1 and Highway 97, do they have road rescue services either now or maybe down the road?
They currently do not. That is covered currently between the city of Kamloops and the village of Chase. That's all up to change at certain points, and things, you know, are never fully static, but that is the current support model.
Director Morris, you got a question?
Thank you. I think Doug did ask one of the questions, but this is just for clarification for me generally. So what I look at is 03, the Monty Creek, obviously the one closest to my heart and my home. And the at 16 at 40,000 2024, this reflects, we still don't have a structure, but this reflects the the allocation to the team. Is that correct? Okay, so that's the build out of that team level is there without the structure, basically. Okay.
For sure, and this remuneration covers training and call out. So we got to remember there's a weekly training component, there's weekend training, it's training, and then that call out component. So with Monty Creek and Pritchard operationally, they're set up as automatic aid. As Monty Creek becomes fully trained to the minimum standards, they will be able to help not only obviously do call outs within the Monty Creek service area that Pritchard will come and help support with now. Conversely, they will be able to go to Pritchard area and help Pritchard with calls.
Director Greeny.
Thank you, Chair. So I gather that these new numbers are going to be recognized or received positively. These numbers are high enough to address people's worth. If we didn't hit the bar, then it's going to be a lot more grumbling.
Great question. I think with that, and that's why our working group was made up of the chiefs with these fire departments, as they know their firefighters best and what those needs and wants are. Absolutely. It may, I mean, there was some great discussion on that health dental benefit piece, but ultimately what that came out of is that would help a few for sure, but looking at the majority, it was more of a wholesome increase the remuneration model, as many people already have benefits through their day jobs and or through their spouses or other ways. So they just felt it would be more meaningful that it was just a dollar value versus extra benefits.
The second part is I'm hearing that part of the reason why these folks, they're not doing it obviously for the $17 an hour, but that's nice recognition. But they really are looking at the training. They're saying, I'm learning something, I'm adding something to my resume. And so in that regard, do we have defined training programs, or is it just sort of haphazard? How do we fill in that potential gap?
Absolutely. So the Office of Fire Commissioner has done a great job recently of creating a bit of a training division where they've now taken and of course we don't call it the playbook anymore. They've taken that piece away and they just call it the BC minimum training standards for structural firefighting. And what they've done is created a training division, if you will, and created different modules to meet exterior fire operations, interior fire operations, emergency vehicle operator, team leader, incident safety officer. All those are canned courses. Our job moving forward is to make sure that we can deliver those in an effective way to our fire departments. So in the past, absolutely, it was a little bit left to each fire department sporadically to figure out how to meet these standards. What we're trying to put together now is a collaborative way to execute this in a really efficient manner. So again, when people leave their families for a 2-hour training, they leave 2 hours thinking, man, I just spent a good 2 hours. I got something out of that, rather than going there for 2 hours and like, this is disorganized. I could have been, doing things with my family that were more important. So that's where we're really getting to, is a better delivery model to execute this training in a more effective way that meets the minimum standards that now that the Office of the Fire Commissioner has created in a very, I guess, detailed way, which we didn't have before.
That's exactly what I'm hearing, is that am I getting something out of this? I've taken 2 hours away from something else. And yeah, I'm going to go shackle a couple of hoses onto some hydrants and we're going to turn them on, turn them off. But are we learning something? Is there something new that we're getting? That seems to be as much an appeal to being a volunteer firefighter as the $17 an hour. And I think that recruitment and moving forward, that training component and variation of training is probably an important part of keeping our people. So thank you for that.
Director Ossoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Relating to Director Granyi's comments about training, I was on the Clearwater Volunteer Department, just had my exterior cert, but I found that a lot of younger folks, they're looking to get into career fire. They're looking for that NFPA 1001, 1002s, and the fact that volunteer departments in Area A are training to BC Playbook, which is I'm gathering is not equivalent to NFPA 1001s and 1002s. I could be mistaken, but I heard the feedback that, you know, guys were wishing that, oh, you know, if volunteer departments could train us to those standards, it would be very valuable, because those tickets themselves, I mean, they got to pay tens of thousands of dollars to go to fire school for those. But in the same token, I also thought about the risk of, you know, that's great. Then they're going to jump over to Vancouver Fire or something, you know, and leave us. So that's kind of, I guess, a double edge. If we provide better training, but then does that mean we train them up to go to other municipal, you know, full-time departments? And yeah, just sharing a thought.
Thank you for that. The minimum the minimum training standards are the 1001. So what happens, or what previously happened before even the playbook, is that was the standard, but non-career fire departments essentially balked at the training, saying this is way over the top. It's not required for what we do. It's super expensive. Our budgets can't afford it. We can't take, you know, 5 people off our roster and send them to the JIBC at $15,000 a pop to get the 1001. So what the OFC did with creating that initial playbook was taking the 1001 standard and breaking it into components. So the exterior firefighter operations is a component of the 1001. The interior firefighting operations is another component of the 1001. So if you do all of the minimum standards, that is the 1001 collectively. For sure, it would be. I think the missing piece is the certificate from IFSTA, or one of the recognized national accreditation, which is, if you go to the College of the Rockies or JIBC, that's where you get that extra certified stamp. But this would definitely set firefighters, young, old, whatever, if they wanted to pursue a career firefighter career, if they had this full training package of the minimum standards, they could easily get certified. And I'm not even sure if there's a means to challenge the course or challenge that to get the certification, but that's all the training's the same.
Thank you. Any other questions? Director Hooton.
Actually, this doesn't have to do with remuneration, but Jason, you and I talked about it about 10 minutes ago, and this is probably a question for Jamie, is in all our EA areas, we all have these pockets of people, and we've got these, call them satellite fire stations popping up here, there, and everywhere. Has TNRD ever looked at a whole electoral area with a snapshot and having an electoral area fire service, taxing everybody within the electoral area, no matter where you live, and we'll provide the service, and we'll figure out where the halls are going to go? Have we ever gone to that model instead of these Turtle Valleys of the world or the Westwolds popping up and saying we want a fire hall?
Thanks. Through the chair, very good question. Yes, that has been looked at in the North Thompson about 15 years ago. And I don't know a lot of the details about that, but an attempt to do that kind of regional corridor. But more recently, officially, no, we haven't taken steps towards that. However, Jason and I have had lots of discussions about that model. And to be honest, you know, your electoral area is the one that's getting closest to making the case for that. So it's an interesting concept, and definitely pros and cons. Just really quickly, you know, the pro being that you have that electoral area wide tax base to fund an electoral area wide fire protection area. But the big con would be that you're in that always is a challenge in fire protection areas, those people that are on beyond the 8 kilometer range that aren't getting any benefit from a insurance point of view. They still are getting a service. Right now, if they're outside of a service area, no one shows up. If they call 911, if they're in a service area, someone will show up. So there's definitely a benefit there, but it's that perception is a good value for money for everyone. It's an interesting discussion, which could, we could talk about for hours, but I mean, I'm glad it's been brought up because as we continue to grow and get more and more requests from all these electoral areas for fire protection, it's a model that we're thinking about. Further comments?
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly support that concept. I think it's an important one. I think there would be a lot of success to it. It's not without its pitfalls, no doubt, but it's definitely, I think, something that needs to be reviewed in a more stringent kind of lens and seeing if it's feasible.
Just, this 1071 or whatever it is, are we able to sort of finish the whole thing off and say, if you come through our program, we'll send you off for a day course over at whatever gives the certificate so they can finally get the certificate? Is there something that we could do to say, if you go through all your modules and you really want this certificate, which is important, we've got a path for that?
That's something I understand the College of the Rockies is looking at right now, and it's something I'm going to further investigate to see if there is that ability to transition, so we can do all the legwork essentially, and then just pay a one-time fee for them to challenge the test and the practical and the theory, obviously, components. But I don't have that answer at this time.
Any other questions from the directors? Thank you for the update. And I just want to go back. I was talking to Carla earlier about our discretionary funds. I was wondering if she could just explain to us exactly how, if you have a surplus, how that works.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Laird, through to the directors. I know this one, it's a hard concept sometimes to get your head around. So I wanted to give the opportunity for that explanation. So let's say in the discretionary fund, every year we tax $13,500. And in 1 year, you only spent $10,500. So there's a $3,000 surplus at the end of the year. And we say, we don't add that money on to the next year. So the next year, we still only have a budget of $13,500. However, we don't have to tax $13,500. Now we only have to tax $10,500. And the other $3,000 is the surplus funds that didn't get spent. So the taxpayers, and that happens in every service. So the taxpayers always get the benefit of that surplus and aren't taxed again for the same amount of money. So just to clarify, that $3,000 doesn't add to your pot. You don't get $16,000 next year. You still only get the $13,000, but your taxpayers don't get charged the full amount because there was a extra surplus there.
Thank you. Okay, I guess we need to go into our closed meeting now. We've got about 15 minutes left, so I need a motion for going. Okay.
Forgive me, Chair. We just do need to say that the motion is to go into closed session in accordance with section 91C of the community charter, just to state the grounds. Thanks.
Yeah, I just said that, didn't I?
Sorry, I didn't hear the 91C section, and that's the crucial bit that we need for the law.
Thanks, I appreciate that. We have to, Director Thorpe and Director Helton, I think, moved in second. So we have to wait while we disconnect.